This lesson is on factoring quadratic trinomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. To factor ax squared plus bx plus c, check the factors of a and the factors of c in the binomials. The sum of the products of the outer and inner terms should be b. So the product of a, the product of c, and then the sum of the outer and inner products would be equal to b. Since you need to check all the factors of a and the factors of c, it may be helpful to make a table. Then check the products of the outer and inner terms to see if the sum is b. You can multiply the binomials to check your answer. So to factor the trinomial 2x squared plus 17x plus 21, a equals 2, c equals 21, and the outer plus inner terms will equal 17, or the b term. You're going to have to guess and check to find factors of 2, factors of 21, and then the outer plus inner terms. For the factors of 2, you could have 1 as the outer term and 2 as the inner term, and then factors of 21, you could have 1 as the inner term and 21 as the outer term. So then we would multiply the outer terms, 1 times 21, and the inner terms, 2 times 1, and add that together and get 23. Again, we're just guessing and checking, choosing some factors to be outer and inner until we find what works for this trinomial. If we chose 1 as the outer term for factors of 2 and 2 as the inner term, and then 21 as the inner term and 1 as the outer term, then we would multiply the outer terms, what we chose, which was 1 times 1, and then add that to the inner terms multiplied together, which was 2 times 21. And that would be 43, which doesn't work either. If we chose 1 as the outer term for the factor of 2 and 2 as the inner term, and then changed our factors for 21 to 3 and 7, 3 being the inner term and 7 being the outer term, we would multiply the outer terms we chose, which were 1 times 7, and the inner terms we chose, which are 2 times 3, and add that together, and it would be 13. Still doesn't work. So if we chose for factors of 2, 1 for the outer, 2 for the inner, and then factors of 21, instead we switched it so that 7 was our inner term and 3 was our outer term, we would multiply 1 times 3 for the outer terms and 2 times 7 for the inner terms. That added together would be 17. So those are the numbers that work for this polynomial. Writing it out, we would have 1x and 2x as the first terms of our binomial, and 7 and 3 as the second terms. Now please remember, we chose 1x and 3 to be the outer terms, so they're on the edges of the two, and then 2x and 7 as the inner terms. So you need to make sure you write them out correctly when you place them in the binomials. We can use the FOIL method to check our answer, and we get 2x squared plus 3x plus 14x plus 21, which is 2x squared plus 17x. When b is negative and c is positive, the factors of c are both negative. To factor the trinomial 3x squared minus 16x plus 16, a is 3, c is 16, and the outer plus inner terms, or the b terms, is negative 16. So, guess and check, we have to arrange and choose the outer, inners, and the factors of 3 and factors of 16 until we get one that works for this particular trinomial. So, if we add 1 as our outer term and 3 as our inner term for the factors of 3, and then we add negative 1 as our inner term and negative 16 as our outer term for factors of 16, we would multiply 1 times negative 16 for the outer, 3 times negative 1 for the inner, and that would equal negative 19. So that one doesn't work for this trinomial. If we chose 1 as the outer term and 3 as the inner term for the factors of 3, and then negative 2 as the inner term and negative 8 as the outer term for the factors of 16, we would multiply our outer terms, which is 1 times negative 8, and then add that to our inner terms being multiplied 3 times negative 2, and we would get negative 14, which does not work. For the factors of 3, we would have 1 for the outer term, 3 for the inner term, Then we would try for 16, negative 4 for the inner term and negative 4 for the outer term. Multiplying together our outer terms, 1 times negative 4 plus 3 times negative 4 would add together to be negative 16. So those are the numbers that will work for this trinomial. When we write them in the binomial, remember we had 1x and 3x as our first terms for the binomial, and then we add negative 4 and negative 4 for the second terms. Remember that when you line them up in the binomial, the 1x and the negative 4 were for the outer terms, and then the 3x and the negative 4 were for the inner terms, and that's what worked to get our answer. You can always check using the FOIL method. 3x squared minus 4x minus 12x plus 16 is 3x squared minus 16x plus 16, and so you know that you factored correctly because that's the original trinomial. Here's an example for you to try, so you can pause the video and come back for the answer. If you were going to factor 6x squared plus 17x plus 5, a is 6 and c is 5, and the outer plus inner, or the b term, equals 17. So you're guessing and checking, choosing outer and inner terms until you find one that works. Here's some examples of some that you may have chosen. If you chose 1 for the outer term and 6 for the inner term for factors of 6, and then you chose 1 for the inner term and 5 for the outer term for factors of 5, multiply the outer terms together, 1 times 5, and add that to the inner terms multiplied together, 6 times 1, and you would get 11. That one doesn't work for this trinomial. Remember, we're trying to get 17. If you chose 2 for the outer term and 3 for the inner term for the factors of 6, and then 1 for the inner term and 5 for the outer term for factors of 5, multiply our outer terms together, 2 times 5, and add that to our inner terms multiplied together, 3 times 1 would be 13, which is not going to work. If you chose 3 for the outer term for factors of 6 and 2 for the inner term for factors of 6, and then for the factors of 5, 1 for the inner term, 5 for the outer term, multiply our outer terms together, 3 times 5, and add it to the inner terms multiplied, 2 times 1. That one does equal 17. So when we write them in our binomials, remember we had 3x and 2x for our first terms of our binomials, and 1 and 5 for the second terms. You have to remember to line up so that the outer terms were the 3x and the plus 5, and the inner terms were the 2x and the plus 1. You can check by using the FOIL method. 6x squared plus 15x plus 2x plus 5 is 6x squared plus 17x plus 5, which is the original trinomial, so you know you factored correctly. Here's another example for you to try on your own, so you can pause the video and then check back for your answer. To factor 9x squared minus 15x plus 4, a is 9 and c is 4, outer plus inner, or the b term, is equal to negative 15. So again, we have to guess and check until we arrive at the right numbers in the right orders in order to have negative 15 be our answer. So we end up with 3 as the outer term, 3 as the inner term for factors of 9, negative 1 as the inner term, and negative 4 as the outer term. Multiply our outer terms, 3 times negative 4, add that to our inner terms multiplied, 3 times negative 1, and we get negative 15. If you guessed right on the first try, then you can just use those numbers. They showed a couple more examples of what would work. 3 for the outer term and 3 for the inner term for 9, negative 2 for the inner term and negative 2 for the outer term for 4. Multiply together our outer terms, 3 times negative 2, add it to our inner terms multiplied, 3 times negative 2, and you would get negative 12, which would not work. If we had 3 for the outer term and 3 for the inner term for the factors of 9, and negative 4 for the inner term and negative 1 for the outer term for factors of 4, it would be 3 times negative 1 for the outer terms, and adding that to 3 times negative 4 for the inner terms would be negative 15. So we had 3x and 3x as the first terms of our binomials, and negative 4 and negative 1 as the second terms. Remember, the outer terms were 3x and negative 1, and the inner terms were 3x and negative 4. So make sure you write them down correctly. You can use the FOIL method to check your answer. So it would be 9x squared minus 3x minus 12x plus 4, which is 9x squared minus 15x plus 4. That is the original trinomial, so you know that you have factored correctly. Here's another example for you to try on your own, so you can pause the video and then check back for your answer. To factor 3x squared plus 13x plus 12, a is 3, c is 12, and outer plus inner, or the b term, is 13. So we have to guess and check until we find the numbers that will work for this trinomial. If we chose factors of 3 to be 1 and 3, 1 being the outer term, 3 being the inner term, and then we chose 1 and 12, 1 being the inner term and 12 being the outer term, we would multiply our outer terms together that we chose, 1 times 12, and add that to what we chose to be the inner terms, 3 times 1, to see if it would work. Adding them together would be 15. It does not work for this trinomial. If we chose 1 as the outer term and 3 as the inner term for the factors of 3, 2 as the inner term, 6 as the outer term for the factors of 12, we would multiply our outer terms that we chose, 1 times 6, and add that to the inner terms multiplied, 3 times 2, and that would be 12. That one doesn't work either. If we chose 1 as our outer term and 3 as our inner term for factors of 3, and 3 as our inner term and 4 as our outer term for factors of 12, multiply the outer terms, 1 times 4 that we chose, and then add that to multiplying the inner terms, 3 times 3, and we would get 13. So those are the numbers that will work for this trinomial. When we write it out in our binomials, we have to remember we had 1x and 3x as the first terms, and then 3 and 4 as the second. We chose 1x and 4 as our outer terms, so we have to write them on the edges, and then 3 and 3x as our inner terms for the inside of the two binomials. You can always check using the FOIL method to make sure you did it right. 3x squared plus 4x plus 9x plus 12 is 3x squared plus 13x plus 12, which is the original trinomial, so you know that you have factored correctly. When c is negative, one factor of c will be positive and the other factor will be negative. Only some of the factors are shown in the examples, but you may need to check all of the possibilities. If we were going to factor 3n squared plus 11n minus 4, a is 3, c is negative 4, outer plus inner, or the b term, is 11. So we have to guess and check until we find the numbers that work. If we chose for factors of 3, 1 is the outer term and 3 is the inner term, and then for factors of negative 4, negative 1 is the inner term and positive 4 is the outer term, we multiply the outer terms together, 1 times 4, and add that to the inner terms multiplied together, which are 3 times negative 1. Added together would equal 1. That one doesn't work for this trinomial. If we had 1 as the outer term and 3 as the inner term, and then we had negative 2 as the inner term and positive 2 as the outer term, we would multiply the outer terms we chose, 1 times 2, and add that to the inner terms, 3 times negative 2, and we would get negative 4, which doesn't work for this trinomial either. If we chose 1 as the outer term, 3 as the inner term for factors of 3, negative 4 as the inner term, and 1 as the outer term for factors of negative 4, multiply our outer terms together that we chose, 1 times 1, add it to the inner terms multiplied together, 3 times negative 4, and we would get negative 11. Still doesn't work. If we chose 1 as our outer term and 3 as our inner term for factors of 3, and 4 as our inner term and negative 1 as our outer term for factors of negative 4, multiply our outer terms together, 1 times negative 1, and then add it to the inner terms multiplied, 3 times 4, we would get 11, which is the number we were looking for. So when we write it in our binomials, we had 1n and 3n, and then we had 4 and negative 1 as the second terms. Remember, we had 1n and negative 1 as the outer terms in the binomial, so they're on the edges, and then we had 4 and 3n as the inner terms. You can always use FOIL to check your answer. So 3n squared minus n plus 12n minus 4 is 3n squared plus 11n minus 4, which is the original trinomial, so you know that you have factored correctly. If we were going to factor 2x squared plus 9x minus 18, a is 2, c is negative 18, and outer plus inner would have to equal 9. So we have to guess and check, choosing which to be the outer, which to be the inner terms for factors of 2, negative 18. So if we chose 1 as the outer term and 2 as the inner term for factors of 2, and then 18 as the inner term and negative 1 as the outer term for factors of negative 18, we would multiply the outer terms we chose, 1 times negative 1, and add it to the multiplying of the inner terms, which is 2 times 18, and we would get 35, which does not work for this trinomial. If we chose 1 as our outer term and 2 as our inner term for factors of 2, 9 as our inner term and negative 2 as our outer term for factors of negative 18, we'd multiply our outer terms, 1 times negative 2, and add it to the multiplying of our inner terms, 2 times 9, and that would be 16. That doesn't work either. If we chose 1 as our outer term and 2 as our inner term for factors of 2, and then 6 as our inner term and negative 3 as our outer term for factors of negative 18, we multiply our outer terms together, which is 1 and negative 3, and add it to the multiplying of our inner terms, 2 times 6, and that would be 9. That's the number we're looking for. So when we write it out in our binomials, we had 1x and 2x as the first terms, and then 6 and negative 3 as the second terms. Please remember when you write it, the 1x and negative 3 are the outer terms of the binomial, so they're on the edges, and then the 2x and the 6 are the inner terms. You can use the FOIL method to check. 2x squared minus 3x plus 12x minus 18 is 2x squared plus 9x minus 18, which is the original trinomial, so you know you have factored correctly. To factor 4x squared minus 15x minus 4, A is 4, C is negative 4, and outer plus inner is negative 15. We have to guess and check, finding factors of 4, factors of negative 4, and choosing which to be the outer and inner terms until we find the numbers that work for this trinomial. If we chose 1 as our outer term and 4 as our inner term for factors of 4, and negative 1 as our inner term and 4 as our outer term for factors of negative 4, we multiply our outer terms together, 1 times 4, and we add it to the multiplying of our inner terms, 4 times negative 1, and that would be 0, which does not work for this trinomial. If we chose 1 to be the outer term and 4 to be the inner term for factors of 4, and negative 2 to be the inner term and 2 to be the outer term for factors of negative 4, we multiply the outer terms we chose, 1 times 2, and add it to the multiplying of the inner terms, 4 times negative 2, and that would be negative 6, which does not work for this trinomial. If we chose 1 to be the outer term and 4 to be the inner term for factors of 4, negative 4 to be the inner term, and positive 1 to be the outer term for factors of negative 4, multiply together what we chose, 1 times 1 for the outer, 4 times negative 4 to the inner, add them together, and you get negative 15, which is the number we're looking for the B term, or the inner plus outer. So we end up with 1x and 4x for the first terms in our binomials, and negative 4 and positive 1 for the second terms. Please remember that we chose 1x and positive 1 for the outer terms, so those go on the edges of the binomials, and then 4x and negative 4 for the inner terms, so that goes on the inside of the two binomials. Using the FOIL method, we can always check our answer. 4x squared plus x minus 16 minus 4 is 4x squared minus 15x minus 4, which is the original trinomial, so you know you factored correctly. Here's an example for you to try on your own, so you can pause the video and then check back for your answer. To factor 6x squared plus 7x minus 3, A is 6, C is negative 3, and outer plus inner would be 7. So we have to guess and check until we find numbers that work. If we chose 6 to be our outer term and 1 to be our inner term for factors of 6, 1 to be the inner term and negative 3 to be the outer term for factors of negative 3, we would multiply our outer terms we chose together, 6 times negative 3, and then add that to the multiplying of our inner terms we chose, 1 times 1, and that would equal negative 17, which does not work. If we chose 6 to be our outer term and 1 to be our inner term for factors of 6, 3 to be our inner term and negative 1 to be our outer term for factors of negative 3, we would multiply the outer terms we chose, 6 times negative 1, and add it to the multiplying of our inner terms, 1 times 3, and get negative 3, which does not work. 3 for our outer term and 2 for our inner term for factors of 6, and 1 for our inner term and negative 3 for our outer term for factors of negative 3, we would multiply the outer terms, 3 times negative 3, and add it to the multiplying of the inner terms, 2 times 1, and we would get negative 7. That doesn't work either. If we chose 3 for the outer term and 2 for the inner term for factors of 6, and 3 for the inner term and negative 1 for the outer term for factors of negative 3, we would multiply our outer terms together, 3 times negative 1, and add it to the multiplying of the inner terms, 2 times 3, and get positive 3, which does not work. If we chose 2 as our outer term and 3 as our inner term for factors of 6, 1 as our inner term and negative 3 as our outer term for factors of negative 3, multiply together 2 times negative 3 for the outer terms plus 3 times 1 for the inner terms, we would add them together and get negative 3, which still does not work. So if we tried then 2 for the outer term, 3 for the inner term of factors of 6, 3 for the inner term, negative 1 for the outer term for factors of negative 3, multiply the outer terms we chose together, 2 times negative 1, add it to the multiplying of our inner terms, 3 times 3, and we would get 7, which is the number we're looking for. So when we write out our binomials, we have 3x plus 2x as our first terms, -1 plus 3 as our second terms. Remember that we chose the 3x and the 3 to be the outer terms, so those go on the edges of the binomial, and the 2x and -1 to be the inner terms, so those are on the inside. You can use the FOIL method to check your answer. 6x squared plus 9x minus 2x minus 3 is 6x squared plus 7x minus 3, which is the original trinomial, so you know you have factored correctly. Here's another example for you to try on your own, so you can pause the video and then check back for the answer. To factor 4n squared minus n minus 3, a is 4, c is -3, and outer plus inner would have to be equal to -1. So if we guess and check factors of 4, 1 being the outer term and 4 being the inner term, and then for factors of -3, we choose 1 to be the inner term and -3 to be the outer term, we multiply the outer terms we chose together, 1 times -3, and add it to the inner terms multiplied together, 4 times 1, and we would get 1, which is not the number we're looking for. If we chose the outer term to be 1 and the inner term to be 4 for factors of 4, and then the inner term to be -1 and the outer term to be 3 for factors of -3, and we multiplied the outer terms together, 1 times 3, and added that to the multiplying of the inner terms together, 4 times 1, we would add them together and get -1, which is the number that we're looking for. So we would have 4n and n as our first terms, and 3 and -1 as our second terms, and so we would end up with 4n and -1 as the outer, and 3 and +1n as the inner terms. You can use the FOIL method to check your answer. 4n squared minus 4n plus 3n minus 3 is 4n squared minus n minus 3, which is the original trinomial, so you know you have done your math correctly. When the leading coefficient is negative, factor out -1 from each term before using the other factoring methods. When you factor out -1 in an early step, you must carry it through the rest of the steps. If we were going to factor -2x squared minus 5x minus 3, the first thing we would do is factor out a -1. That would give us -1 times in parentheses 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. Now we're going to factor that remaining trinomial that is inside the parentheses. So a is 2, c is 3, and outer plus inner equals 5. If we chose 1 to be the outer term and 2 to be the inner term for the factors of 2, 3 to be the inner term and 1 to be the outer term for factors of 3, we would multiply the outer terms we chose together, 1 times 1, and add it to the multiplying of the inner terms, 2 times 3, and we would get 7, which does not work for this trinomial. If we chose the outer term to be 1 and the inner term to be 2 for factors of 2, and then we chose the inner term to be 1 and the outer term to be 3 for factors of 3, we would get 1 times 3 for the outer plus 1 times 2 for the inner, and that would be 5, which is the number we're looking for. So when we write out our two binomials, we have 1x and 2x as the first term and 1 and 3 as the second term. The 1x and 3 are the outer terms of the binomials, and the 1 and the 2x are the inner terms of the binomial. Since we pulled out a -1 at the beginning, we have to remember to include it in our answer. -1 times x plus 1 times 2x plus 3. Here's an example for you to try on your own, so you can pause the video and then check back for your answer. If we're going to factor -6x squared minus 17x minus 12, the first thing you would do is factor out -1. So you would get -1 times 6x squared plus 17x plus 12. Now we're going to factor the remaining trinomial, which is inside the parentheses. So a is 6, c is 12, outer plus inner would equal 17, or the b term. So we're looking for factors of 6, factors of 12, and outer plus inner to equal 17. If we chose 2 to be the outer term and 3 to be the inner term of the factors of 6, and 4 to be the inner term and 3 to be the outer term of factors of 12, we would multiply together the outer terms we chose, which were 2 times 3, and add it to the inner terms multiplied together, 3 times 4, and we would get 18, which does not work for this trinomial. If we chose the outer term to be 2 and the inner term to be 3, for the factors of 6, inner term to be 3 and outer term to be 4 for the factors of 12, we would multiply the outer terms together, 2 times 4, and multiply the inner terms together, 3 times 3, and we would add it together to be 17, which is the number we're looking for this trinomial. When we write it out as the two binomials, we have 2x and 3x as the first terms, and 3 and 4 as the second term. We chose 2x and 4 to be the outer terms, and 3x and 3 to be the inner terms. We pulled out a -1 at the beginning, so we have to make sure to include it in our answer. We would have -1 times 2x plus 3 times 3x plus 4.